Hey, welcome to the Adorama Live ProRes RAW Atomos Tour. This is all about education on the amazing new format that Apple announced at NAB, and Atomos is one of the first to support within its products. And today we're going to take you through the journey of how ProRes RAW came about, what the ins and outs technically of ProRes RAW is, and the advantages that you get as a user. And we truly believe it is a game-changing invention, and we're very proud to be part of that. So we're going to give about a half-hour demonstration. We're going to show you the footage we shot for the launch video together with Apple, and we're going to go through and then take a few questions from you guys online to hopefully shed some light on some of the things that you have questions on. So without further ado, we'll get into it. And we're here in sunny New York. It's been a beautiful day. We flew in yesterday from Melbourne, so it's a short flight, 24 hours. And it's a great city to be in, and Adorama have been a big supporter of both Atomos and Apple and Final Cut. So we're going to talk a lot about those three things today, as well as one of the other launch partners, DJI, for ProRes RAW. So I just want to start with a bit of history. Why is this guy with a funny accent from Melbourne standing in front of you? About 7 years ago, had an idea with my co-founder to put a capture card at the camera and record directly to this amazing format called ProRes, which had just been kicked off 2 or 3 years earlier. And it was a pretty revolutionary idea, and got to stand in front of some pretty high-level executives in Apple and pitch the concept. And they thought it was a great idea, so they gave us a license for ProRes. And since then, we launched the Ninja and the Ninja 2 and a bunch of other products. And if you're in pro video, I'm sure you've heard of Ninjas and Samurais and Shoguns. And these are the assassins of the traditional high-cost workflow. We really did jump on the DSLR bandwagon and give ProRes recording to those amazing cameras. Fast forward 7 years, we've sold 250,000 units, and we're really focused on this in between the imaging and computer world. And we connect those worlds by recording, playing back, monitoring, giving you all the tools you need. And we've brought lots of innovations also in the on-set editing and tagging of footage that gives you much more speed and time and higher quality, faster finishing for your customers, a better result for them. But we're really there to assist the cameras to up the quality of their recording on a more affordable camera, and then hand over a file to post-production and finishing, which we all know that if you're a professional, you need to finish your movie or your job for your customer. And we help you do that faster and in a better way using an end-to-end workflow that makes sense. So for the last few years, we've been working heavily with the camera makers, and the best way to enable what we believe is the revolution of the future, which is HDR. And if anyone's been watching Atomos's products, we've been announcing 10.5 stop dynamic range screens that really do show you true HDR on set from cameras. And the best way to show HDR is to get raw images from the sensor. Anything that's already been processed by the camera, some decisions have been made by the camera, which limits your creativity and limits the amount of processing you can do on the image after. So the best thing to do, just like in photography, is to grab that raw sensor data. So we've been doing that for many years, about 4 years actually, and we support 9 cameras right now, some of the best names in imaging from Sony, Panasonic and Canon. We support the FS series, FS5, FS7. We support even down to the FS700, and then go right through to EVA1, great camera, right through to the VeriCam and the C300 and C500. And we've been supporting the RAW coming in and monitoring that on set. In this image, you can see that we've got lots of different Atomos monitors, lots of different cameras to show the flexibility of using the solutions. And traditionally, we monitored that, we set it all up correctly in HDR, so everyone was loving that for the last few years. And then we recorded ProRes. So we had this raw data, but we were recording a video file. And that was great for post-production. However, that means my device, the Atomos devices, was making the decisions like the camera was. So you could monitor it, so getting the raw values was great for monitoring, but we didn't keep those raw values. So we sat down with our good friends at Apple in the Pro Apps division, lots of different great people there, the ProRes team, the Final Cut team, and of course the iMac group who are making these amazing machines. And we cooked up a plan to record from these raw sensor values that we'd unlocked from these great Japanese imaging companies. And we worked together to put a final solution to what if you could take the raw values, have all the flexibility of RAW, but have the performance of ProRes. And that's when this was born, ProRes RAW. So we're very proud to be one of the first to support this, and we announced this at NAB 3 weeks ago. So this is our global tour to help you guys understand what this really means. And what it means is the performance of ProRes and the flexibility of RAW. What does that mean? Performance of ProRes. Well, ProRes has become 80% of the recording in the Pro space. It wasn't intended to be that from the beginning, but it was so good that it has become even a distribution format. People ask for this to pass files around to each other. And the reason they ask for it is it works on every computer. You can decode it really quickly inside CPUs. The quality is of the highest level, but the smallest file size. So it's a nice balance between those. And it's built by the people making the computers, i.e. Apple, to perform at the highest level and continue to perform as you upgrade your machine. So you're not stuck and then have to upgrade everything. So it's a scalable format. And that's a big message from Apple, that the machines are scalable. Final Cut had a rewrite in 2011 and is scalable. So you get all the benefits of the latest machines. And of course, the format is scalable, and Atomos unlocked that in the workflow of ProRes RAW. So how does the flexibility of RAW, the performance of ProRes, and the main machines that we're talking about are iMacs and MacBook Pros, because they've got the performance level to really get the best out of ProRes RAW. So we've got Final Cut. You can see these amazing color tools in the corner there. And it's really developed quite substantially over the last, especially the last 2 or 3 years, where they could build on the platform of independent resolution. They can put any file through this thing, and it's just an amazing software. And we're going to give you a demo of how that all works. So there's 2 flavors of ProRes RAW. There is ProRes RAW Standard, which gives you, which is equivalent to probably a ProRes 422 HQ kind of data rate level, but gives you all the wonderful flexibility of RAW. And then you've got ProRes RAW HQ, which is slightly less compression, so it's a bit bigger files, but still able to go onto SATA drives and still is a manageable format. I would personally be recording ProRes RAW HQ because there's not that much of a data rate increase from between the two, but ProRes RAW is probably the workhorse of formats that will be recorded from most of these cameras. So let's talk about comparative data rates. So why doesn't this have any data rates on it? Because it depends on what frame rate you're at and what resolution you're at. So uncompressed 12-bit RAW, we'd love to work in that, but to record it is a bit of a nightmare and pushing the boundaries too far for today's world. So we've all traditionally had to record this visually lossless format that played very nicely in all software and has been building over the last 10 years to be this industry standard. So how does ProRes RAW and ProRes RAW HQ compare to that? Well, first of all, the differences between ProRes RAW and ProRes is a target bitrate format. So there's a bitrate for HD P30 2997, for example, in ProRes 422 HQ, it's 220 megabits a second, and the data rate is maintained. It goes up and down a little bit, but on our recorders, you maintain that quality. So no matter what scene it is, we hit that rate. ProRes RAW is all about maintaining quality. So if the quality is really high in the image, i.e. there's no noise, it's exposed correctly, and we'll talk more about that for HDR production, but you want to get a lot of light in there and get a really nice image. If you do that, your data rate goes down. So it's all going in the right direction. ProRes RAW performs better with better images coming in. If you've got noise in there, the data rate goes up. So if you get a big file from your friend, from your shooting friend, you'll be like, oh, you probably didn't expose it correctly. And there's a lot of differences to exposing correctly for RAW shooting and HDR shooting than for SDR and Rec. 709 shooting. And then if you look at ProRes RAW, not the HQ, that's getting right under the 422 HQ kind of level. And why is that important? Hard disks, SSDs, more affordable SSDs, and you can record for longer on those SSDs. So it just reduces the cost of your production, but you've got better quality and more flexibility. So again, all going in the right direction. And one of the things about performance is picture-in-picture, multi-stream editing. Well, this is an iMac 18 core, so it's a beefy machine. And it can do 8 streams of ProRes RAW and 7 streams of ProRes RAW HQ in real time. But you've still got all the flexibility of RAW. If you look at current RAW workflows, you've got Canon RAW, which can do 3 on this machine, and Red Code that can do 1 on this machine. It's far better performance from ProRes RAW because it's built by the computer maker. Kind of makes sense, right? It's all one ecosystem. So picture-in-picture, decoding, encoding fast, doing it all at the same time, very, very good performance. And then you've got faster render speed. Why is rendering important? Because you need to apply effects, do that quickly, check it again, so that you can be more creative. And then rendering and encoding, decoding also extends over to exporting to delivery formats like H.264 and H.265. So you can see that it goes about 6 times for ProRes RAW HQ, 2 times versus Canon for ProRes RAW. And this maintains that performance improvement over the current RAW formats. Day 1, we announced together, worked really hard. Final Cut shipped on the new iMacs and the older iMacs as well, and the MacBook Pro, so no one's left behind, free updates, and the Atomos Shogun was also updated with a new firmware that recorded ProRes RAW. So 50,000 customers of Shogun Infernos, day 1, received this. So they've been shooting for 3 weeks with the new format, or almost a month now. We also updated our Sumo that you see here, so these 2 are supported. DJI were also the drone partner. A lot of aerial footage, really important. They do ProRes RAW also. So there's an ecosystem here. And why is it those partners? Because when you introduce something new, you need to make sure that the end-to-end solution is as good a quality as possible, and that you can show customers what this thing is really capable of. And that's what the ecosystem of ProRes RAW, Atomos, DJI, and Apple has done. So how do we fit into the picture, Atomos? We do the monitoring to start with. So we've developed a very advanced engine of 10.5 stops of HDR processing. So we take the log or the RAW and we represent it for you. We do all the techie stuff so that you can just shoot correctly. So set it up so it looks like you're looking at the image. You can see the dynamic range that the human eye sees, which is around the 14 stops. And we show 90% of that. So you can really set it up correctly. And TVs, HDR TVs can represent that as well. We give you all the tools, exposure tools. AtomOS keeps improving. We keep giving you free updates, just like we give you updates to enable ProRes RAW on our devices. And we give 1500 nits of brightness range that we can map this. And if you're shooting SDR, then you've got 1500 nits of super high bright. Put your sunglasses on, it's very bright. We also do the difficult things like RAW to SDR conversion and pump that out so you can look at an SDR monitor at the same time. So these are all practical things when you have to deliver the 2 different types of formats. You've got a screen that's full HD, and you've got 3D LUTs that you can apply on top to see what it's going to look like when you're in post. But with ProRes RAW, we're recording, well, not only are you monitoring, set it up, now you're recording this amazing sensor values in ProRes compression, which means it plays nicely in the computer, but you've captured all this wonderful raw data to then process. Very important is the ecosystem. You'll see we've got a Sony FS5 here showing our products, and then over to the AJA box, which is also connected to the Mac. And it's really important to know that we support Panasonic, Sony, and Canon cameras. We've worked individually on each one of those cameras to get the raw data out in the most efficient way and highest quality, and then we encode to this standard ProRes RAW that is now going to be a pretty big thing throughout the industry. And what does that allow us to do? Because we support so many cameras, you can go up to 15 stops of dynamic range. You've got 12-bit RGB coming from these sensors, so you're not cutting it to 10-bit or 8-bit out of the HDMI port. You've got up to 5.7K resolution because you can put more raw data over a single pipe than video data. And I'll go into what is the difference between video and RAW in a second. 240 frames a second, so we unlock high frame rate from these cameras. And these cameras are $4,000, $4,000 to $15,000, that range. And any business that's making and selling their wares for a 5K kind of production, over a few productions you can pay for that. You can pay for this type of camera. You can unlock slow motion. There is no video in the world today that is a top quality video that doesn't have slow motion or speed up or something to that effect in their shot. There's also a lot of color correction going on footage. And you need RAW to be able to really push colors around and get the creative look that makes you one of the leaders. And I think one of the most important things here is the camera data. We record into the ProRes RAW file. We worked hand in hand with Final Cut, ProRes, and our recorder to capture f-stop, to capture ISO, shutter, speed, and angle. And we pass that across so that the real-time processing of all this very technical capturing of data can just happen for you in Final Cut, which Apple's been amazing at over many, many years, simplifying difficult technology into a one-step process, and that's what this is. You hit record on our unit, and Final Cut does the rest once you get the file into the edit. So the ProRes RAW family is these. It's great to be standing next to this type of technology. And very important to point out the AJA box, which is the connection over Thunderbolt to output this wonderful 4K RAW over Thunderbolt and then over SDI to us so that you can monitor it. So not only are we with a recorder, you can put us on set next to your MacBook Pro, and Mark, our content producer who did the shoot with Apple, is going to come up and show you some of the amazing footage that we took, and that he was editing using a Shogun and a laptop and checking the footage and seeing what it looked like in HDR on set. So he didn't have to come back to the studio to do that. He used the recorder monitor as the grading monitor at the same time, especially for production purposes in the field. Very, very convenient, and you're matching the quality that you just saw. Of course, I don't need to mention MacBook Pros and iMac Pros. They're awesome machines, and the wonderful thing that Apple have really recommitted to the Pro world, they're making Mac Pros again, they're making displays, they've announced that they're making HDR displays for guys like us, video producers. And this is it's a very cool thing. So I just want to touch on the difference between video and RAW. So RAW is the sensor values. They haven't been turned into video. There's been no LUTs applied to it yet. It's the linear values from the sensor. They haven't been turned into RGB pixels where a lot of decisions have been made. And ProRes traditional is those RGB pixels packed up nicely, whereas RAW is one step before that, packed up in the same way. So you just cut out the processing step. You now move that processing to the computer. Intel's pretty good at that, getting all the great American tech companies together, Apple, Intel, and that little Australian company, Atomos, that helped make it all happen. The last thing we need to mention on the whole workflow, so we're talking cameras, your monitor on set and your recording. You're talking like $4,000 to start with. You're talking $1,000. This one's $2,000 for a bigger monitor. You got the AJ box at a couple of thousand, and you got your iMac Pro, which is step into at I think about 7,000 for the 8-core, and then you go up, and then you've got your laptops at about $3,000. So it's not a huge spend for a business. We're selling to businesses here who are creatives. These are tools for their workflow, and you get a lot of work out of these, and you'll be able to deliver some amazing solutions to your customer. The last thing you need is storage. You need to take these files and store them somewhere, so that's the last thing that you need for the whole workflow. And we're all about rec, play, monitoring, and editing, the whole solution. So that's the unlocking of creativity by Atomos, and I'm going to ask Mark Naidu to come up and share his experience in using Final Cut. He's going to show you the Final Cut project that we shot for the launch of ProRes RAW. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Demo time.
Hey everybody, how you doing? I might just explain a little bit about the shoot that we did. So we shot a bunch of scenes all across Melbourne, Australia, and we had this concept. We really wanted to play on the word raw, so we kind of took all of the raw elements of what you would consider a great Saturday night. So good food, good drinks, good friends, and we sort of developed that into a treatment, and it turned into a pretty ambitious shoot. So we've got some amazing stuff to show you here, so I'll just take you through. So I'm going to take you through Final Cut, and I'm going to show you some of the benefits of Final Cut and ProRes RAW, and start from here. Now you're actually monitoring the HDR on the Sumo. Previous to that was the user interface. Okay, so I'm just going to stop you here. Now you can see here that this image doesn't quite look the same as the rest of the images here. And there are a couple of things that are happening here, so I'm just going to show you here. That's the actual vlog image that we've recorded. A lot of people are used to shooting log, and it's important to know that vlog is still available, and it's still a great starting point if that's what you're used to grading. So this is what the log image looks like, and I think it's quite important here to the point that Jeromy made before about all of the metadata coming through when you record the file, is that Final Cut recognizes all of that metadata, and it makes some pretty awesome decisions based on that, and it's all very much non-destructive. That's the beauty of RAW, is that it really truly is a non-destructive workflow. So one of the decisions that it does make is to apply the RAW to log conversion immediately, and there's also, if you have a look here, I'm just going to select the camera light. So it already knows that this was shot on a Panasonic camera, so it's applied the Panasonic to log conversion. And now if you select the camera light for Panasonic Vlog, you can see immediately that image looks beautiful. It looks a lot better. Now there are some more things that you can do here, and I'll show you through on the effects tab. At the moment, I'll pull up the scopes, and you'll see here that we're sort of only hitting 100 nits on the waveform. So if I take off this HDR tools tab, you'll see that we're now looking at the expanded dynamic range. We're looking at much more dynamic range there, and that's up to 1,000 nits, even getting up to 2,000 nits there. And you can see how much better that actually looks on a HDR display. There's more things that we can do here with the color, and it's the beautiful thing about this is that the color wheels in Final Cut have really come a long way, and there's so much that you can do on this in terms of color. So one of the other things you can do here, we're just going to select that to give it a bit of a boost. These are some tricks that we applied a bit earlier on. And the other thing you can also do here, if I collapse this, is you can also go to the hue and saturation, and I'll just expand this also. And you'll see here that what we've actually done before is we've sampled with the eyedropper some of the spinach here, and when you actually apply that, what we've done is we've just picked out a little bit of that spinach and increased the range there. So there is a lot of room to move with the tools for color. So I'll keep moving on here, and I'll just collapse these. Okay, I'm just going to bring you back to a clip here. That clip's... Oh, I'll keep playing that. see the difference in the color there between the HDR and the SDR. This is 6K footage here from the drone. Beautiful 2K 240 frames like that. Okay, I'm just going to come back to this clip here, and you can see here that there are multiple shots in this frame here. So we've actually got 5 streams playing here, and all of these are different frame rates and different resolutions. Just to show you how powerful ProRes RAW is, I'll expand this. If I click on some of these clips, for example, I'll just open up my inspector here, and you can see here that we've got all different frame rates. So this one here is 2398 at 6K, and then we've got 4K DCI 50p, and we're talking about 5 streams playing without a problem here at all. So I'll just go back and play that through again for you. This is on the 18 core machine, and it's all playing back at better quality. So that's 1-to-1. That really is phenomenal. I mean, if anybody's worked with RAW before, that really is unheard of to play that many streams back in real time. And that became, for us, just being able to play back in real time like that, shooting and being out on field, checking things, critical things like our exposure, being able to, like Jeromy mentioned before, being able to ingest on a laptop, and it was a 2014 MacBook, it wasn't a new laptop, that I could play back on without a problem just to check my signal integrity was amazing. So that's the final cut piece that I wanted to show you.
So Mark, when you're on, when you were doing the shoot, what equipment did you use? So
we actually, we used a range of cameras. We used the FS5. We also used the Panasonic Vericam LT for a few shots, and then we used the EVA1, which was awesome, and we also used the C300. So we used cameras from all vendors, all the Sony, Japanese camera manufacturers, and then with the Shogun Inferno and the Sumo. And the beauty of this is that they all matched just perfectly in post. So this I think was the real benefit of seeing how that RAW came together in post.
And did you need to care, Mark, about what camera it was, what resolution it was, what log it was? Did you need to care what frame rate it was?
I did care, but in the end it didn't really matter because there was enough. There's so much meat in these files that it doesn't really matter. There are some of the files that we intentionally, shot incorrectly, like we tried to overexpose them. And when we handed the overexposed shots over to the post house that did the edit, they couldn't find the overexposed shots, and they were like, "I thought you shot this overexposed." And we're like, "We did," but because Final Cut does such a neat job of translating all of that data, it's not a problem. So, and just a tip for those who are shooting ProRes RAW now or planning to shoot ProRes RAW. As Jeromy mentioned before, really super important to expose your shots correctly and get a lot of light into that sensor. Yeah, it really is. I mean, shooting 2 stops over is ideal. And then on the Inferno, it's really important to know how to read your waveform. Once you nail that, you get amazing pictures, truly amazing pictures. So
so in the background you've got Final Cut translating these raw sensor values with all the data we recorded in the file, unpacking it, applying the correct log and then the camera LUT on top as your starting point, so you can move it around from there. So you get if you just want to finish quickly, then you'll be able to play with ProRes RAW just like ProRes and just like normal video. So all of that is done for you in the background. But if you want to deconstruct that and apply more technical correction to your image and more creativity, then that's there too. And you go right back to the raw sensor values that you can construct your own look and feel to the image again. And that's all done in real time while going out of Thunderbolt through a converter box into a HDR monitor. Right now we're using ours. You could use a TV. You could use a higher end, $5,000 or more kind of model, depending on what type of work you're doing. If you want to wow your customers, probably get one of the better ones. But you can do this in really any environment today, and that is such a difference. 5 years ago, this was a $10 million Hollywood production that was using RAW. That is the fact. Today, it's a $4,000 camera, a $1,000 monitor recorder, and your current Mac will do very good quality, so you don't even have to upgrade your computer. However, if you want killer performance and you really want to get the job done and be really creative, then you step into a new machine at the time that's right for your business and when you need to upgrade that. So our message is, check out ProRes RAW. Most people have a Final Cut version on their Mac. Fire it up again, make sure it's up to date, because that gives you ProRes RAW. We've given you free ProRes RAW. Many of you are using Atomos products. We encourage you to do that. And you should be able to, with the right camera in your hand, rent one. A lot of people have these cameras anyway. You can step into a ProRes RAW workflow today. And exposing correctly is very, very easy. We give you all the tools. Make sure your waveform's perfect inside the HDR range, and you're good to go.
Yeah, also important to mention that ProRes RAW is available on all of the Apple suites, such as Motion, Final Cut, and also Compressor. So that's great. Also, some other great news is that anybody that's owned Final Cut 10 in the past gets this upgrade for free. So that's just amazing. You get the free upgrade. And Apple also have some pretty cool stats on Final Cut users now. So they've hit 2.5 million users. And just last year, they had a 25% increase. So it's 25% on last year. So that's big numbers. It's important for, I think, for creative professionals to keep creative. Yeah, and that's about it for.
So those on the live stream, if you got some questions, we've got some questions going on.
New 5-inch Atomos will power GH5 or 5-factor box 4K.
New 5-inch Ninja. I think that's what the customers are talking about. Can I come over to this camera maybe? Ta-da. Yeah. There you go. So that's the new Ninja 5. Will it also power? There's no output, but there are adapters that then give you power out, so DC out. So technically you could do it. We have a continuous power module that we're working on, which will have DC out, so you potentially could do it, depending on the size of the battery that you put on the back of it. So the battery would have to be able to take enough current draw to power the Ninja and the camera. The GH5 is a much lower power camera than the Blackmagic design ones, because they're using a heavy ASIC, whereas Blackmagic use similar chips to what we use inside, so that'll draw a lot more power, so you need to be careful of that one. But I think the GH5 and the Ninja would probably be a possible combination.
So, is it true Canon baked in ISO into their files?
Is it true that Canon bakes ISO into their files? Depending on the camera, but yeah, I'll go. Depending on the camera, that Canon have two kind of modes. One's on the C500, one's on the C300. In C300, yeah. So in the C300, you can adjust the ISO in the ProRes RAW files that are captured. There is a little bit more processing done on the raw values, but it's not turning it into video. It's just cleaning up the image from the sensor. So there's a lot of cleanup that, we're saying it's the raw sensor values, but what needs to happen from a sensor is, so analog light hits the silicon, excites the silicon in this red, blue to green Bayer pattern, and then from that, an image needs to be constructed. It's not an image yet. And then from that, an image needs to be constructed. And during that process, the maker of the sensor, after testing it, when they make it, get the exact values and where the sensor might go wrong, where some of those RGB values mightn't be wrong. So there's a lot of cleanup going on just to get you an image. What we're talking about is the cleaned up image that's already been cleaned up by the sensor maker, but the values remain there in their purest form for us to then play with after. So there is some manipulation of the image necessarily at the very early stages of picking up the sensor values, but that's the same in photography. It's the same for any CMOS sensor in today's imaging world. But that doesn't mean we're baking anything in. So the answer is no, we're not baking anything in, but there is some processing going on. I think people are getting a little bit confused about how much that process, what used to happen is clean up, then turn it into video. We're just not turning it into video, and we're letting the computer do all of that work. Sorry?
Adobe Premiere.
Well, right now, the ecosystem of ProRes RAW, as was ProRes in Apple style, is a controlled ecosystem where we know that everything's going to work to the perfect high quality technical level that Apple will put their name to. As we move into the future, I'm sure, and I can't speak for Apple, but I'm sure they want the ecosystem, I want the ecosystem, everyone wants the ecosystem to grow. And once we've bedded that wonderful high quality solution through Final Cut and through your Mac, then I imagine it will go out to others. That's something for Adobe and Apple to discuss, but I'm sure the ecosystem will grow. All good? Any questions from the crowd?
You may have touched on it already, but how exactly are you bypassing camera processing to get the raw data from the data?
So we work, yeah, so the question is, how are we actually bypassing the camera processing? So we actually work very closely with the development teams for these cameras. So we have a very special relationship with the camera maker's development team, and we work with them on taking the raw output. So instead of sending it through the full path of their processing chip, they tap it off before they start processing for the internal recording and before it gets turned into video for HDMI out. So that's why there's no HDMI RAW. It's always over SDI, because SDI is proprietary to each camera maker, and we can do quite a lot with SDI as well in terms of customization. So you'll notice that all the cameras we support are giving us RAW over SDI. That's because we're tapping off just before that processing starts, but when the image has already been in its sensor values, been put into a form that we can start to process it. So it's exactly the same as that processing path. We just take it out of SDI and then we can pack it into ProRes RAW. Yes, sir.
In Final Cut, I saw that you were using, there were basically two drop-downs when you were dealing with the raw footage.
Yes.
There was one to go from raw to log.
Yes.
And then there was one for a camera LUT.
Yeah.
Is that camera LUT just basically going from log to a linear signal?
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, that's correct. And then you can choose to apply a different LUT, right? We're doing the standard one to get you to the starting point. Right. And to be honest, it just behaves really like ProRes did when you've already got it all baked in. And of course, you've got some latitude in ProRes, but this gives you much more. So yes, that's correct. You're going linear to log to then applying that on top.
I do have a question about dynamic range.
Yes.
I saw that you had cameras that were shooting 15 stops. This is a 10-stop dynamic range codec, right?
No, that's not correct. So yeah, it's so is ProRes RAW a 10-stop dynamic range codec? The answer is no. The 15 stops. So the question was, you're talking about 15 stops, but is it a 10-stop dynamic range codec? The 10-stop dynamic range that we talk about in the presentation, and I can go back to to this one, is what Atomos is representing on the screen. So stops is about analog, right? It's analog light and the intensity of that light. It's 2 to the power of. So 2 to the power of 10.5 just happens to be 1500, which is what our 1500 nits can resolve. Okay, that's what stops are. So then you need to convert that into bits. Now ProRes RAW is independent of bit depth, right? So it would record in 12-bit. That's what we do today from the EVA1 and from the Vericam LT. That's 12-bit. The other cameras are giving us 10-bit log, which is equivalent to 12-bit linear, right? Because you're squashing it into the log curve. But in general, ProRes RAW is independent of that. If it sends a 16-bit, then it's capable of doing it. Whether we're capable of doing it or a device is capable of capturing it is a whole nother question. But definitely Macs would be able to process that. So that's the beauty of what Apple have gone back to the drawing board in 2011 with Final Cut and the processing and the whole redesign, which obviously has been a big question around Final Cut for a little while now, but all that work of 64-bit independent resolution, bit depth is independent, you can do anything with it, is now really coming into its own where you can turn on ProRes RAW like that. And that's a big question that people have is probably the difference between analog stops light hitting it. And the reason I talk about stops is we're turning that bits into stops again on the light, analog light coming out of the screen, right? Now, because it's 1500 nits and the range of black point to white point, it gives me 10.5. As we develop better screen technology and we control the whole engine behind the screen, we could probably level that up. But the beauty of what we're doing, you might start at 15 stops with the analog coming in, but when you convert that to bits, there's some noise at the top, noise at the bottom, you lose a couple of bits, right? So you're at 15, you go to 13. And then you've got a conversion, and there's some noise in there as well when you go to the final bits, right? So you're sitting at between, you end up at about 11 bits of information, which equates to 11 stops. So,
What do you do with those 50 bits?
well, if they're noise, we take them away. And that's actually mostly done within the sensor. So that's proprietary to the camera makers. And they all have their kind of secret sauce that they put on it. But basically, everyone's trying to use mathematics to get the best digital image and the most range out of an analog light hitting silicon, giving us a voltage, right? And everyone's grappling with the kind of limitations of the physics of that. The silicon gets smaller and smaller all the time, gets more sensitive, gives us better readings, and those algorithms get better and better. But you should not equate 15 stops to 15 bits, for example. That isn't the equation. It always ends up between 10 and 11. That's why our screen technology, being around 10.5, is covering most of that range and showing you 95% of what the true dynamic range of that is. If you've got a bit better monitor, a $100,000 monitor, you could probably eke out that extra 0.5 of a stop, but is it materially going to change the way you produce? Probably not. And are you going to be able to shoot a wedding down the road with it? Definitely not. But that's what you can do with this setup.
I have one quick question for somebody back in Tennessee.
Yes.
You actually asked this. He wants to know what LUT, with Atomos, what LUT should we be using to view ProRes RAW on the Inferno?
On the Inferno? Okay, so we apply the similar standard LUT. Oh, sorry, repeat the question. So what LUT should we apply on the Inferno when we're shooting ProRes RAW, right? So again, after working heavily with Apple and trying to simplify things, we apply and we work with the camera makers to do this, we apply the exact same camera LUT as much as we can to the raw images coming in. So that it looks like what you would record internally out of the gate, but you've still got all the flexibility of using RAW. What LUT do you want to use? I'd say that's your starting point, and then take a look at what type of production you're doing that gets you the best result. So then it's about, you could create your own LUT. We support .cube files, so you can put that in. My suggestion is hook this up in your laptop and straight out to our unit. Look at what LUTs and how they look coming out of Final Cut, because you can apply the same ones, and then use that in the field. But I'd be starting, I wouldn't probably be doing, unless you were doing a really heavy production, I probably wouldn't be applying a lot of LUTs, because you've got a really good starting point there, and you can do that in the creative process. And you've got a lot of latitude, a lot of color to play with, a lot of brightness to play with, so you're not gonna hit the limitations. It used to be really important to pick the LUT. So it's a great question, right? We're kind of removing that, because you've got all the manipulation you can do in here. You're not limited if you use the wrong LUT. Does that make sense? Even if no matter which LUT you apply, it's still all the sensor values that you can process in Final Cut.
You mentioned before render times with ProRes RAW.
Yes.
Is ProRes RAW kind of meant to be used also as a delivery format?
No, it's not. Is ProRes RAW meant to be used as a delivery format? Very good question. ProRes RAW is a post-production grading editing format, and that's what it's there for. It is not there to be given to after the process to your client, right? That's what ProRes is for. So you can go, if you started in RAW, 444 means a lot. It really does. If you could go 422 HQ. In fact, Vimeo announced it at NAB, which I was really happy to see, direct export from Final Cut straight up to Vimeo. So you can play back ProRes files directly from Vimeo. I mean, that is killer. And it's been integrated perfectly into Final Cut. It's just a one-click process. That's really cool. So it is not a delivery format. It may become a delivery format over time if everyone picks it up like ProRes, but ProRes was never meant to be a delivery format either, but look, here we are, and we're delivering ProRes everywhere because it's such a good format. So it may very well end up that ProRes RAW becomes a delivery format, but right now, absolutely not. Your raw images come in as raw, you chop it up, apply your effects, and export it as either H.264 or we'd recommend ProRes. Correct, correct. Yeah, to show you that the speed of rendering isn't, make a cup of coffee like the old days, 1 hour, 1 hour. We're talking 6 times here. So you're doing a 1 hour in 10 minutes, that kind of stuff, depending on the footage and depending on your project.
Are there any plans to support Array RAW?
In our products, Array RAW, yes, we had any plans to support Array RAW. We did announce that we would support Array RAW, and then the SDK came from Array on the Alexa Mini, which didn't support the output of RAW from the camera. So we would be supporting all of, I think, 2,000 cameras ever made by Array in the Alexa 65 ST or something. Don't quote me on the camera, but it.
The reason I asked, there's a lot of Alexa Classics, Alexa Plus out there.
So would you want that? Because we surveyed some customers and they said it was more about the Alexa Mini. So we haven't really bothered to do that integration.
Is fantastic when you can do it on camera. You've got the money for it. Then you've got a friend that's got a Classic that says, "I'll rent it to you for $5, and if I can pull the 2.8K Array RAW out on something like a portable Atomos,
Well,
then
yeah, well, that sounds like a really good solution, right? So if you guys would like to see Array RAW on these classic cameras, because we just assumed that people weren't using them as much as they would, the Alexa Mini, which is probably the case. But if people really do want it, then we'd be happy to implement it. We just didn't want it to be meaningless to do that work. So if you do want it, let us know.
I do.
Okay, one. We got one.
Because right now, it's the only option is basically the codecs, which is really expensive.
Yeah.
The Odyssey. And the Odyssey is great, but it's also a lot more money than what you guys are offering.
Yeah.
And I don't like the screen.
We love giving free updates that make you want our products more. So no, we'll definitely keep it in mind. And anyone else who wants that, please let us know. Any other questions? All good. Thanks for your time, guys. One more.
Probably a review question. I think you already said this.
Yeah.
We were overexposing those shots in the demo footage about 2 stops.
No, we weren't overexposing them. We were exposing them on our. So this is a good chance for me to show something I was going to show before. Can we flick to the Sumo here? And I hope I don't echo too much. What I'm going to show you, Mark, could you just drive that and go back to the footage there? So I'm going to show you the scopes here. And can you go back to the, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Okay, so this is what the log looks like, right? And it's really squashed in there. We've squashed all the dynamic range in there. It's flat. Can you click on and here we're extending it out. So how we exposed it, and this is showing you the range of the actual, can you take the HDR effect off there? Oh, it's off. Yeah, good. That's only for the screen anyway. So the idea here is when I'm shooting this range, I need to stay within that, right? And what I've got on here is PQ 1000 nits. So when we shot it, we made sure we stayed in that range. But it's very different to shooting SDR. So I'm talking, we had the thing wide open, shutter speed right down to just no blur, but it's still really open. It's way more light coming in. And the only thing you've got to worry about is that this doesn't shift up and start clipping right at the top, which is a lot actually on these sensors with 15 stops on them, right? It's a lot to open up too much. So we're rarely using ND filters, even shooting right into the sun. Can you go back to the lighthouse right at the start? This is the one I love, just showing and even on here to keep this here, we shot just under it. And I wasn't there when we shot it, but I would have gone even further with the camera. And it's really hard. A cameraman today is sitting there going, I'm so used to keeping it in. Don't let it blow out. Don't let it blow out. Whereas shooting HDR and shooting RAW, you've got you actually want, if you want to deliver SDR and you want a really clean image, you want to move the exposure right out of the bottom couple of bits of the sensor, because that's the noisy part. That's why when it's low light, sensors go, they're really horrible. And the difficulty with SDR shooting was you had to start in that range. So you had to kind of balance noise versus don't blow it out, right? Now you can go wider and you can shift it up and get out of the bottom noisy part, which means you really do not, if I zoom in on that, zoom in here, there's no noise in there. I'm not noisy at all. And that's the difference between shooting wide dynamic range, exposed really high exposure, i.e. a lot of light coming in, and using everything. Shutter speed, ISO, you're letting light in, which is kind of counterintuitive to what traditionally we've been doing as cameramen and production crews. So there's a little bit of a learning curve, but the beauty of what we're showing here is you can do anything with it after inside this end-to-end solution. So your scopes are really important. Just don't push it too high and don't keep it in the noise area. So there's that beautiful range, and that range is actually really, really wide. There's not a lot of mistakes you can make if you're letting a lot of light in. Thanks, Mark. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks for your time, guys. Appreciate it.